Tej. The Super Bowl prep, it's been so fun because I think you can have Super Bowls where it's like, oh, like everything points in one direction. I do like the framing of the best roster versus best quarterback. I think it's a convenient sort of framing. It explains a few things. It may just come down to that simple fact of Patrick Mahomes, but I think when we've both dug into it, there has been a lot of fun from statistical stuff, from schematic stuff, from really, really micro matchup kind of things. I'm really excited to talk about it. We'll start with the Chiefs offense versus the Eagles defense. Of course, as always, do just a little overview of the units before we start talking about how they match up. And the Chiefs offense, Tej, it's brutal efficiency. It really, really is. Their ability to convert on those third downs it's supposed to be something that's not sticky, but at the same time, it's Patrick Mahomes. So it does feel like that's something that you're going to be able to do. I can remember earlier in the season where we talked about Patrick Mahomes, his sack avoidance maybe dipping a little bit, but he's back to an offensive infrastructure that's getting the ball out quick. They really leaned on that heavy RPO plan against the Bills early on. In their last game, I think that Xavier Worthy has grown into his role, and Andy Reid is really understanding how to use him in different times. I think when I watched that Chiefs-Bills game back, I look at it a little bit and say, the Bills defense isn't necessarily the best unit in the league, where I think the Eagles defense probably is. And the Bills defense did actually do enough to put their offense in a position to win games. So the Chiefs offense, it's a little bit tough sometimes to talk about it because you do have a little bit of a split just based on, the health of the offensive line, the health of all their receivers, and kind of having everyone together for the season.
I do think that plays a big role in how you project the Chiefs offense in this game, where it's a little tough for me to use their entire season split of ranking 8th in offensive EPA per play up until this point in the season so far. Like I do really just like want to look at their past couple of games to really see how this offense has changed since they've shuffled parts of their offensive line. They've had Hollywood Brown inserted into the lineup. Xavier Worthy, like you mentioned, has taken a step up, and we saw all of that come together last week where they had a 93rd percentile performance versus the Bills. If it wasn't for that one weird fumble by Patrick Mahomes in a scoring position area, like they probably would have had a 98th, 99th percentile performance versus a Bills defense, like you mentioned, that was pretty banged up and not playing that well. But you also see some schematic changes from Andy Reid and from Patrick Mahomes when looking at this Chiefs offense in the playoffs so far. In the regular season, they had a plus 5.6% pass rate over expected, which was towards the top of the league. But in the playoffs, they've had a plus 10.5% pass rate over expected. So they've really turned the dial on how often they're passing, which makes sense. Like you want the ball in Mahomes' hands as often as possible in crucial situations. We've also seen Mahomes' scramble rate increase in the regular season. He took off for a scramble per drop back on 5.7% of those. And now that's gone up to 13.6% in the playoffs. And we've really seen in both the Texans and the Bills game, like his legs have been a huge part of their offense. They even had a design rush with him, which we don't see often from the Chiefs with Mahomes. So that's also something that I think has changed for them in the playoffs. And then just like Mahomes not throwing the deep ball almost ever. And like you think about the big moments for the Chiefs in these playoffs so far. First game against the Texans was all about Travis Kelce over the middle of the field, creating yards after catch. Last week was Xavier Worthy on some shorter throws and Juju Smith-Schuster over the middle of the field, creating yards after catch. And so we can really look at how they've distributed targets since Hollywood Brown has returned to the lineup and throwing out week 18. So we're looking at week 16, 17, and then the 2 playoff games here. And Xavier Worthy has had a 25.4% target share, which is first on the team. He's averaging 11 yards after catch per reception right now. So like he's been a huge yak guy for them. Travis Kelce is at 24% target share. He's worked over the middle of the field in terms of the depth of his passes and is also pretty successful with his targets. And then you have Hollywood Brown with a 17% target share, and he's been more of the deeper guy, kind of being thrown with a 11 ADOT on average, and they've had decent success when targeting him down the field as well.
And we've talked about previously how in the playoffs, sometimes your passing game efficiency is actually tied to your third target. So for Hollywood Brown to be healthy, where obviously you have Kelce, now you really have Worthy being used in different ways. And it felt like in the last game, Andy Reid was having Juju Smith-Schuster take those snaps off of DeAndre Hopkins' plate. So it felt like that was their plan of attack in 11 personnel. And I mean, Hollywood Brown, it can play. So I'm glad that he is healthy. and he's there. We're even in the start of the season where we're like, oh, or after that kind of Chargers game, we're like, oh, you don't know Rashee Rice. What's his passing game going to look like? It does feel like they are pretty comfortable where they can actually attack you in different areas of the field, whether it's Xavier Worthy shallow, whether it's Travis Kelce medium, or whether it's pushing that ball a little bit deep. But as you mentioned, they're not a high like completion 20 plus yard down the field kind of attack. So that is really interesting. We'll of course talk a little bit more about the specific matchup with the Eagles secondary. I love that you mentioned the scramble rate. I know we've talked about it a bunch. Just when playoff quarterbacks are bumping up that scramble rate, it's instead of saying 1 to 2 to check down, it's 1 to 2 to I'm just gonna convert this on the ground. That's really gonna be a big thing that we're able to see early on. Just how the Eagles are kind of dealing with zone coverage. It does feel like the Chiefs are going to go into this one and say we're just going to throw the ball 50 times in this game, because as we start talking about the Eagles defense here, the Eagles defense, it's just been a pleasure to watch this season. I can't wait to go down to New Orleans and just really ask a bunch of the players about some of the specific plays where you could see them sort of like figuring things out in real time, whether it's how we deal with motion in the flat, whether it's how we deal with passing off routes. It's been a mature coverage unit from a bunch of young guys. I think that has been a lot of fun. And at the high level, it is a 4-man rush, matching zone coverage defense that is going to really do their best to kind of close those windows. It's going to feel a little bit more funky than some of the zone coverages where you have players just sort of dropping to spots. Their pass rush is really built around Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter almost exclusively lines up over the offense's right guard. They're not big on kind of moving him, swapping him. So you'll get Milton Williams on the opposite side. We'll, of course, talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the offensive line. Defensive line matchup. Tej, what do you have as some high-level points for the Eagles defense?
Yeah, I mean, this Eagles defense is still just playing at such a high level right now. They like the thing that has really impressed with me the entire season, especially the second half of the season, is like how good they are against things that are usually advantageous for offenses. So like when offenses use motion, play action, or throw over the middle of the field, it's almost always more efficient than when they don't do those things. And the Eagles are first in EPA per play allowed against motion, second in EPA per play allowed against play action, and fifth against middle of the field passes. So they're just like a really sound defense at really limiting the damage that offenses can do when they do plus EV things for them. So that's something that has been really impressive from Vic Fangio and all the players on this defense. And something else that I thought is something to watch in this game is they only blitz on 23% of dropbacks, which is 26th in the league, but they have been good on 5 and 6 man rushes. So I'm curious to see how like open they are to blitzing Mahomes in this game, where you had Mahomes like 2 years ago and like no one wanted to blitz him because of how efficient he was against the blitz. He's still pretty efficient against the blitz, but not what it was in 2022 and before that. So that could be something to watch in this game. And then another thing is they play single high on a lot of dropbacks, and so we'll probably see that again in this game, and they really have the players to pull off just like a wide variety of coverages where you have especially on like the back end, like Quinyon Mitchell has erased some really good wide receiver ones this season. Like he was doing a really good job against Terry McLaurin last week. I believe he was on the other side of the field when McLaurin had his touchdown. So you have that for him, like where he's coming into the game strong. You have Cooper DeJean, who has been really good back there as well. And then in the front seven, you have Zach Bond, who's just been amazing this season. Oren Burks has stepped in, decently for Nakobe Dean's injury. And then this defensive line where like Jalen Carter is just like, he can like completely take over a game, which is like very special from an interior defensive lineman, and like really just wreak havoc on the opposing offense. But then you have other ways to get pressure too, where like Milton Williams is like no longer underrated. I think like you were talking about him early in the season. He's going to get paid this offseason. And then Nolan Smith has really come along. He was someone who was talked about as more of a project coming into the league, end of his second year now. And we've really seen him take a step up in his game in the playoffs as well. So like just front to back, like a very sound defense. And that's why they've been so good this year in terms of a lot of their advanced metrics.
Vic Fangio, he has a lot of decisions to make in this game. Of course, you have a decision to make every game as a defensive coordinator, but your approach in general here, where I think the Bills wanted to play man coverage against the Chiefs, you lose Christian Benford, and you just like you do not have the people to keep up. I do think the Eagles have the players to keep up between Mitchell, between Slay, between DeJean at different times. Now, do I love the idea of Xavier Worthy just kind of running by everyone? I do not. At the same time, you look at some of the snaps against the Commanders where Zach Ertz was able to break free, but a lot of times, it ended up just kind of in a funky rotation where it ends up with Reed Blankenship on him. I think all things equal, Fangio probably prefers and usually has Gardner Johnson kind of down in that spot
Mhm.
anyway. And then the defensive line versus offensive line, Tage, that one's an interesting one for me. From a Chiefs perspective, I assume you're going to leave Tooney out on the left tackle, just kind of hearing about how everything is with kind of health along the other spots in the offensive line. That means you have a rough spot in my mind, or at least a matchup negative at the left guard spot and the right tackle spot. I don't know. I kind of would like the idea of moving Tooney back inside, so you have those kind of three strong parts inside. I would love to see Fangio move Carter over to go over left guard. I don't think he will, just because
Mm.
that's not what he's done all year. And then the Chiefs have the question of, well, do we say let's just have Smith line up and play one-on-one with Jalen Carter, and let's actually bump Creed Humphrey over to help Caliendo over Milton Williams. So you're saying star on star, let's double the kind of the second spot there. I think there's just so much to consider. I feel like Tish, I don't even know where to start with thinking about how to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, there is like it is a huge task to always play the Chiefs, especially in a game like this where Andy Reid will have some special things that he's kind of been saving throughout the season for this game. But yeah, if you're Fangio, like I really agree with what you said there, where it's like kind of you want to stick to what you're good at. You have the players on the defense that are capable of playing man coverage, and there are going to be times where Mahomes or Xavier Worthy or Hollywood Brown like just burns you. And as long as you kind of can keep sticking to the game plan and hoping you are able to get pressure pretty often because of some of the advantages that you have there, especially with Jalen Carter, and then you have the corners on the back end of your defense that can hold up on like a decent amount of plays like that. That's kind of the strategy that I would go with if I was Fangio in this game. But it's very tough to live by that, just knowing how good this Chiefs offense can be.
Because you can do all right, we're gonna force, our Fangio will prioritize different areas of the field, and like he's trying to push that ball kind of down, sometimes to the outside. So you can say, all right, like, can you do the 17 play drive every time the way the Commanders did and ended in a field goal? The problem is, Tage, I think Mahomes can just do that. So you can have that approach, you can have that philosophy, but it is the last game of the season. It is the biggest game of the season, and Mahomes can do that. So I think that is really frustrating from a defensive perspective, and that or I will be interested to see how early on is Fangio getting the 5-man rush cover one type
Mhm.
situations where that's not something I would expect him to do a ton. He did that a little bit against the Commanders. He wants to be 4-down rush. They want to play a lot of cover 4 this season. They are really, really comfortable with that. That means that low and outside piece where the linebacker is over there, Travis Kelce's going to be working on that spot a lot. So I want to see what Fangio has in terms of adjusting in that way. Seems like Brandon Graham is going to be able to play, which is it's such a cool story, I think, for a lot of different reasons. He was talking about how like the risk is re-tearing his triceps, and he's just like, yeah, like I'm good with that. Like that, or not that he wants that to happen, but he is comfortable with that risk. It could be his last game of his career. It could
Mhm.
be. I mean, he might come back next year. We'll see. I just yeah, the force them to check the ball down. Like we'll kind of rally and tackle that approach. I just feel like maybe in this one it's going to be a tough one. Tage, what do you have as a positive matchup for the Chiefs offense?
Yeah, so this is something that I talked about before, but I think especially in this game, this is going to be crucial for the Chiefs offense. And that's just quick passes. Like I think when they are able to get clean looks off the line of scrimmage and they can get the ball out in under 2.5 seconds, that's going to be a huge advantage for the Chiefs in this matchup where the Chiefs have had a 0.35 EPA per pass on throws of under 2.5 seconds this season, which is the best in the league. On throws of over 2.5 seconds, they dropped down to zero point 0.1 EPA per pass, which is the 10th best in the league. And so if they're able to just get rid of the ball quickly and not allow the chance of a pressure happening to really increase, like that's something that should really help them in this game. And what's interesting about looking at the Chiefs in that 4 week time frame that I've been looking at to analyze their offenses. Xavier Worthy has a 32.4% target share when the pass comes out in under 2.5 seconds, and he's at 11 yards after catch per reception in those situations with a 71% success rate when targeted. So he's generating a lot of production off of these passes, and he does seem to be their best receiver right now in terms of being targeted. And so when you can get something like that where his target share increases because you're passing quickly, like I do think that should be a good thing for the Chiefs.
I like it, Tish. The quick passes are sometimes it's in RPO where again I mentioned the game against the Bills because they really came out and were like, we're gonna RPO you like this
Mm.
whole entire drive and really be able to take advantage of you. I'm actually interested to see uh like how that actually impacts the second level where those linebackers are usually closing out that space, but at the same time, you do have to fit the run a little bit. At the same time as that same time, the linebackers for the Eagles have done a really good job all season. Not being late necessarily to the run, but I think that they just play their keys really, really well, where they're comfortable in those situations where you'll have one linebacker that's playing a little bit further back. So how they deal with that, I think, will be a good one. I love that you mentioned the Worthy having all of those yards after catch and being prioritized on those early passes. Tish, you do an awesome job with the research. That was a good pull. That was a really good pull. Just thinking about the way that they'll put Worthy on one side of the formation. Now he's motioning across the other formation. Now he's kind of going to the flat on the opposite side. So he's doing a good job of stressing defenses. And if I was to point to one area, that flat area is sometimes a place where I think you can attack a Vic Fangio defense. At the same time, I keep saying at the same time, Tage, because there's so many things being considered together. The Eagles are really good at just tackling screens, for example. So some of those short passes, I do think they do a good job limiting yards after the catch. So that's going to be something
Mhm.
to monitor. I'm really interested in how the Chiefs' red zone offense does versus the Eagles' red zone defense because we can think back to the Super Bowl a few years ago where the Eagles really had trouble with some of those kind of quick motions from the Chiefs. I do think there's been times this season where Fangio's red zone defense has struggled a bit where you have like everything drawn up correctly where it's the zone match coverage, but the offense knows how they can kind of break your rules or just stress your rules where now we have someone running away from leverage. And we've seen different times where the Commanders game where you have they went for that 2-point conversion where they kind of throw into the flat to Eckler. You see a guy running in motion. You see Cooper DeJean chasing him. I wonder how the Chiefs are going to just, have some nonsensical motion to mess with DeJean. DeJean had a really nice tackle against Jamar Chase earlier in the year on that sort of like, we're going to fake one way, we're going to go the other way. So it makes me feel decent that he's going to be in a positive spot. It's just a little bit more stressful when the Chiefs are doing it for whatever reason. So I think that will be a lot of fun to monitor. Tays, you have something that you like here from the Eagles' defensive side?
Yeah, I have a couple things, that I think could be good for the Eagles in this game. Like, obviously, we've talked about this before. Like, when you bring an elite defense to a game where you're playing an elite offense, like the offense usually does better than like the average of the two teams. But like, I do think that there are spots where the Eagles can have an advantage in this game, and one of them is when they play light boxes on early downs. So the Chiefs have a 0.24 EPA per dropback against heavy boxes. So I define that as seven or more defenders in the box, but only a 0.06 EPA per dropback against light boxes, which is six or less defenders in the box. And the Chiefs' run game hasn't been able to take advantage of light boxes. They have a very similar EPA per rush against light and heavy boxes this season. And so I'm curious to see if Fangio on early downs in particular, like wants to play with even some 5-man boxes, especially if you're in longer situations like a 2nd and 11 situation where you're not as worried about the run and you feel confident in your tackling ability because you also look at the Eagles this year, and I know I was just talking about quick passes, and I think that the one quick pass that the Chiefs probably won't be able to get away with in this game is screens, as you mentioned, where teams have thrown 61 screens against the Eagles defense this year. They've had a 33% success rate on those. So 1 out of 3 screens is a successful play, and they've had a negative 0.41 EPA per pass on those screen plays. And like this Eagles defense tackles so well. And so like if they want to go light boxes, make sure they have the defenders on the outside to defend the screens. Like I do think that could be something that benefits them in this game.
I love the idea of Vic Fangio game planning and looking at it and being like, really good in light boxes. How light can we get? He's like, can we go 4 guys? Can we go 3 guys? And then at a certain point, it's just Jalen Carter on the defensive line. Everyone else is outside. How light can a light box really be? I do really think that Cooper DeJean at the nickel he really is a skeleton key for this defense where I mean, we don't have to do like, oh, what is it going to look like next year conversation. But if Slay is gone and signs point to, hey, this might be his last game as an Eagle, do you move DeJean outside? Do you keep him in the slot for nickel and then kind of bump him outside for base? That's going to be something really interesting to look at. What happens at the safety position for them? That's going to be fun to see. But I'm so impressed with his ability to just be like a willing tackler and taking on blocks. And you see that really back to his preseason film where Fangio, I mean, he's off an injury. He's sending him off the edge. He really wants to test him, kind of figure out, okay, like, can this guy, take on sort of a lot of times it's kind of the move receiver that's kind of trying to dig out that nickel spot in a few different ways. So for him to be playing at that level, it's really, really important for this defense because the Chiefs will bring out 2 tight ends. The Chiefs will bring out 3 tight ends. And Fangio's, I mean, every defense, right? They're going to match based on personnel. I think for them, they'll stay in nickel until proven otherwise. Like if you're dominating them on the ground in 12 personnel, okay, now maybe you bring Jordan Davis out there, you get into that base look overall as a defense. But for DeJean to be playing at the level that he has been playing so early on, it's a super fun secondary to watch. Did you have something fun just you're thinking about overall from the Chiefs offensive perspective?
Yeah, real quick before I get into the fun matchup is talking about like the 11 personnel versus 12 personnel thing I think is really interesting because the Chiefs don't use or 11 personnel that often relative to the league. They have the 28th highest rate of it, but they use the second highest rate of 12 personnel, and they've been just as good out of 12 as they have been out of 11. What's really interesting about this is the Eagles have actually seen the least amount of 12 personnel in the league so far this year, and their performance does drop a little bit from 11 to 12 in terms of their EPA per play allowed. So if I was Andy Reid, like I'm testing that early, like I'm putting out Noah Gray and Travis Kelce at the same time, just like seeing how the Eagles respond to it and trying to figure out if there is actually signal in the Eagles defense becoming worse when they face 2 tight ends. So I do think that's something that I will be watching on Sunday. But a fun matchup is, I mean, everything's just pointing towards potentially big game for Xavier Worthy in this matchup where you have week 16, 17, and then the divisional round and conference championship game. He's at a 25% target share, which leads the team. Against single high, which the Eagles will play a decent amount of, he's had a similar target share, but he's increased his yards after catch per reception when going up against single high because of how he's able to use his speed on the outside. And then I also mentioned this earlier, but on quick passes, he's getting 1/3 of the quick pass targets right now, has a very high success rate, very high EPA per target. And so, it would be really cool for a rookie like Xavier Worthy to have a big game in the Super Bowl. Like, I think that would be super interesting. And like, it's just like wild to me that the Chiefs have made the Super Bowl again without their wide receiver 1 even playing. And someone in Rashee Rice who looked like he was going to have a potentially great season, and now Xavier Worthy, who him and Mahomes just like weren't able to connect for most of the year. Like they've really just come alive these past 5 or 6 weeks, and you can see the potential of a big game actually happening in the Super Bowl for him.
We were so in on Rashee Rice stage. I totally forgot about just how far in that we were on him this season. Thinking back to that week 1 game against the Ravens where they were able to get to empty and it felt like, oh man, they're going to be a spread and shred type offense the entire season. And I like that you mentioned all that about Worthy. There are still times where it's like, oh, like maybe it's details of a route or obviously situations where, you get a foot out of bounds on a play that maybe in his future will be caught. So when we think about, the Chiefs offense, like, can you make them execute over and over? I think Mahomes can, but sometimes, it feels like there could be another spot that they're maybe not able to get it. I like that you mentioned all that about 11 personnel and 12 personnel. Obviously, we'd have to dig like deeper to figure out, okay, what are the reasons why? I do think at the high level, one, I mean, a lot of offenses don't have 2 viable tight ends. A lot of them want to just kind of live in 11 personnel overall across the league. At the same time, I think some teams want to get to 12 personnel to either like run on your smaller looks or pass on your heavier looks. And so if Fangio says, okay, I'm just going to hang out nickel, like Cooper DeJean, my guy over here, is just dealing with your blockers and we're not concerned, then you're not getting that advantage as an offense. So that can kind of dissuade you. But I mean, if you have those those big guys on the interior for the Chiefs, and they're able to push kind of over that right guard spot a bunch, that will be good. So it's going to be a big one for Jalen Carter to just sort of deal with it overall. It feels like Jalen Carter versus the Chiefs interior offensive line overall. That's got to be a fun matchup from the Eagles defense perspective.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like the way that he's been playing this entire season, but especially in the playoffs, like I do think is going to make that a very fun matchup where this Chiefs interior offensive line, was like the strongest point on their offense, like at the beginning of the season, like since they moved Joe Tooney outside, like it's still a pretty strong group. So like those snaps of Creed Humphrey versus Jalen Carter are going to be very fun for you to watch back on in the film on Monday morning after this game.
And I'd love to see the Jalen Carter fake stunt where he's used it a few times this year. I'm gonna go do some research, see who the idea man behind all of that was for Carter to be able to do that. I think Nolan Smith could beat Juwan Taylor at that right tackle
Mm.
spot a bunch. I think Milton Williams could beat Mike Caliendo at that left guard spot a bunch. I'm gonna certainly monitor early on. Well, where is the center sliding to? Is it to Jalen Carter to go really full on him? Is it to Milton Williams because you feel comfortable with your right guard against Carter? That's going to be a really interesting thing early on, and just seeing how many of the pressures that the Eagles are able to generate, are those getting converted to sacks? Are those getting converted to throwaways? Are those getting converted to Mahomes' positive scrambles? That's going to be something to
Mhm.
look at. The third down, fourth down efficiency, of course, where the Chiefs like to attack that flat. How many times have we seen Patrick Mahomes kind of play fake and then get a running back kind of go in a flat? He just holds on to it. I would love to see Zach Bond be able to deal with that well. It feels like Bond has just such a good feel for how things are kind of moving overall through play action. There's the example from the first Commanders game where they had sort of like a Daniels faking the run, booting out and running, and Daniel or Zach Bond being in a really good spot to take care of that. So a ton of fun things to look at on that side of the matchup. Let's move on here to the Eagles offense against the Chiefs defense, where the Eagles offense, of course, is built through a really dominant offensive line. Jalen Hurts maybe played his best game in the last two seasons against the Commanders. Still some things that you would like to get cleaned up, but hopefully, moving in a positive direction. It seems like they're about to lose Kellen Moore this offseason to potentially become the head coach of the New Orleans Saints, where, I mean, Kellen, put on for your future fans, bud. Like, let's really rip that game plan. I thought he had a really strong game plan against the Commanders. What do you have here for the Eagles offense?
Yeah, I mean, Eagles offense, we've talked about it a lot. They're going to run the ball a ton in this matchup, and like they've been doing this entire season. They're 32nd in pass rate over expected, and this explosive run game that they have is just like so much fun to watch. I was talking to our friend Judah about this a couple days ago, and like the really interesting thing about Saquon, from last year at the Giants to this year at the Eagles is like his success rate on a down to down basis, how often he's gaining like 4, 5, 6 yards has like increased, but not like a ton, like relative to just like how much his explosive run rate has increased. He ranks fourth in explosive run rate, but 11th in rushing success rate out of 41 qualifying running backs this year. And he like gets tackled for a loss at like a league average rate. Like the Eagles run game is just built off of explosives. And when they're third in EPA per rush, or when someone like Saquon is third in EPA per rush on the year, like I think that's what really matters right now for the Eagles. Like we can talk about what regression might happen next year, but like as long as he can keep turning in these rushes that for most running backs would go for 20 yards into like these 50-yard touchdown runs, like that's been carrying the Eagles offense for large portions of this year. And what's really impressive to me is he's been able to generate a positive EPA against heavy boxes too. So even if you put 7 defenders in the box, he's still able to get a positive EPA against it. And that even counts on early downs as well. So, same trend there where he's like, he's able to like just kind of once he breaks through the second level, beat the last safety to the end zone because of his speed and acceleration, which has been really fun to watch when it comes to the run game. Going over the pass game, definitely had its ups and downs throughout the season. And really wanted to look at the weeks where AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert all played. And so we have 160 total passes from those games. And AJ Brown, to no one's surprise, leads the team in target share, 33% target share, 56% success rate when targeted. Devonta Smith has a 21% target share with a 70% success rate when targeted because he's been targeted a lot shorter than AJ Brown in terms of pass depth. And then Dallas Goedert has a 20% target share in that time span, and he has the lowest ADOT of those three main pass catchers there. And you brought up earlier, like how like your third pass catcher is very important in the playoffs. Like there's been a lot of research that shows that. And so for Dallas Goedert to be back in the lineup, to be getting a 20% target share, is just like very helpful for the Eagles when, defenses can't devote just all their resources to defending Brown and Smith on the outside.
And for whatever reason, Jalen Hurts is just super, super comfortable with Dallas Goedert in the playoffs, where sometimes in the regular season, I mean, I don't have the numbers on it, but it feels like there's times where he's turning down some of those throws to Goddard, but in the playoffs, it's like, all right, we're gonna let it loose. So it does feel like, between those three, you have a really good core, and even Barkley as a pass catcher, that is a positive, but the Chiefs defense does a really good job of forcing your running back into pass protection, where Barkley had a real good pass
Mm.
protection game against the Commanders. Was there a holding on one? Tej? We're not referees. That's not really for us to talk about. I'm not an expert in that particular part of football, so who am I to talk about that? So overall, that will be fun. I like that you mentioned all the things about Saquon Barkley. And of course, when we look at light boxes, heavy boxes, it can change just based on, well, what is light, what is heavy versus different offensive personnel. So at the same time, Saquon does a great job, obviously hitting home runs. So if you're going to be, like we're really going to kind of sell out and try and create a splash play. So against that, heavy box, but only one high safety, then maybe that can mean that, Barkley breaks one tackle and he's gone, as opposed to sometimes if you're going to have two safeties, not
Mm.
that you're letting up 5 yards every time, but you're oftentimes like pushing the ball to the outside. You have the safeties rotating down. You're hopefully to use the sideline a little bit as well to kind of get that guy out. So part of me could see a game where maybe this is the ideal for both sides, where the Chiefs do not run the ball once and then the Eagles do not pass the ball once, where it's just like the absolute opposite extremes in so many ways, where I'm going to be fascinated to see how Jalen Hurts is involved in the run game. How effective is he? How many times do the Chiefs just say, if you were running a read play, we're just going to let Jalen Hurts carry the ball? Like, we're totally fine with that, as opposed to having Saquon running inside. So that's going to be on Kellen Moore to figure out the situations where you're running that counter bash scheme, where, the quarterback is the kind of counter aspect of it, but then the running back is running kind of the away from the whole entire blocking scheme. So figuring out ways to get Hurts downhill, as opposed to having to work side to side in that same way. Here's we'll talk about the Chiefs defense here, where, Steve Spagnuolo is so fun to watch on a game-to-game basis, on a play-to-play basis, on a year-to-year basis. They have a very clear identity. They're going to blitz you. They're going to break your pass protection rules. They're going to break their own pass protection rules. They're going to break our AI model blitz prediction rules over and over and over. They still have, strong coverage player, of course, in Trent McDuffie. Watson is back on the outside there as well. So it feels like, Spags could say, we're going to keep those guys outside, keep those two high safeties, really, put this game on your quarterback. I think if you're choosing one way or the other, where Hurts absolutely can do it, he has done it at the highest level. While I was watching back the Super Bowl game, and even like one of the drop, or maybe a drop if you consider it a drop, like later in the game, DeQuez Watkins. Hurts played such a
Mm.
lights out game, so he really has it in him, I think, to be able to do it. You come off a positive game against the Commanders, and I think there's a little bit there. Tej, what do you have overall for the Chiefs defense perspective?
Yeah, Hertz is like I do think Hertz is like a different quarterback now versus what he was in that Super Bowl. But like, yeah, you do hope like that is the hope, right? If you're an Eagles fan going into this game, where it's like we saw him have like probably the best game of his career in the Super Bowl, like at the biggest moment. So like can he kind of like do that again? It was against very similar defense, different players now on the defense, but like very similar scheme that he might see in this game. But yeah, what it really comes down to for me in this game from the Chiefs defense perspective is they have ranked 17th in EPA per play allowed on the season. They have not been good against the rush since week 11. Like I think you've pointed that out in some of your articles and content and stuff. So like that's something to definitely monitor. But they are really good against heavy personnel. So like I think like we'll probably see a lot of 11 from the Eagles because of that. And they can be got on motion and play action. So so that is definitely something that Kellen Moore will probably look into this week as well. To me, like I think this game might come down to like one, how often the Chiefs can get quick pressure. And like if it's Spags just like saving some unique blitzes, like we saw in the last defensive snap from his perspective in the Bills game, like is he just going to be sending those at Hurts in this game? And then like, what can Hurts do when he's pressured? Like that'll be something that's really interesting to monitor. When they do play man coverage, AJ Brown has a 45% target share against man coverage in those games that were all three top pass catchers played together. That's been a thing for the Eagles for 2 years now. Is like AJ Brown gets a target against man coverage on like about half of the pass attempts against it. So like, do the Chiefs have like kind of a plan for that, or like forcing the ball away from AJ Brown? When they do play man. And then I have to mention this: the Chiefs saw 14 quarterback sneaks in the regular season. They gave up a successful play, which is a first down or a touchdown, on 13 of them. So they only stopped one quarterback sneak in the regular season. They had Allen in the playoff game. Like they were able to figure out what gap he was going in. But like it's much harder to stop the Eagles version of their quarterback sneak than the Bills version. So I'm sure the Eagles will be very comfortable using that against the Chiefs defense.
That Bills quarterback sneak, it feels like Josh Allen, he would go kind of horizontal and then vertical.
Mm-hmm.
And so Drew Tranquil jumping over that left guard Tej. Drew Tranquil, obviously close to my heart, just watching him drop back as safety. Can't wait, ask him about some of his nonsense during Super Bowl media week. The Eagles, the way they do their push sneak, it's a little bit more like vertical and then kind of falling off to that left side a little bit more than that kind of first step. So I still feel like the Eagles should feel relatively positive about that situation. There was a lot of good stuff I thought you mentioned there, where that last blitz against the Bills, it's when you have that kind of condensed edge where Spags sees that and is like, all right, let's go ahead and send a corner off of that, because it's an easier path for the cornerback to get to. It's going to get
Mm-hmm.
that pressure a little bit quicker. A lot of times, are you bumping your pass protection out to the cornerback? Like, I mean, sometimes you have to like full slide it. So that makes it a little bit difficult just for you to predict that sort of going in. And there are going to be situations in this game, hopefully not too many, maybe just one. The Eagles pass protection is going to get got, not by like oh man, this guy can't block this guy, although we'll talk about Chris Jones certainly later. Spags is too good. Like, he is too good. He knows
Mm-hmm.
all the pass protection rules. He is going to find a way to get a free rusher. And as you mentioned, is Jalen Hurts turning that into a strip sack? Is it a 5-yard sack? Is it a 1-yard, 2-yard sack? Is it a scramble where you can be positive? Is it a situation where you can just throw the ball away quickly? And instead of having a super negative play in that situation, just kind of be relatively neutral. And I think we will see early on what is the pass protection plan overall. Where is it a 5-man pass protection plan? Because if it is that, I feel confident in saying you're going to get a bunch of free runners, particularly through that middle area, maybe off the edge as well. Is it a 6-man pass protection sort of approach where now you're taking Saquon Barkley out of running a route? Or do you just say, hey, we're just going to have 7 people in protection. You can send whoever you want. We're going to be able to deal with it. We don't care if we waste some of these blockers. We can have our tackle kind of standing around when you drop out your defenseman, because we feel comfortable with attacking your secondary. Overall, it still just feels like Spags comes into this game and says, we're going to send some of those kind of creeper type pressures, but we're going to maintain our 2 high structures. So we're going to
Mm-hmm.
play, 3 defenders to one side, 3 defenders to the other side, and over your 2x2 sets, and still mess around inside, force your running back into protection. So you're able to kind of get the best of both worlds there, because as you mentioned, AJ Brown against man coverage, they can sort of just press that button over and over. Tej, you want to talk a little bit more about, just when Jalen Hurts is pressured?
Yeah, so when you look at when Jalen Hurts is pressured in this game, like he still has the a huge drop off from kept clean to pressured, where 0.5 EPA per drop back when kept clean this year. So when there's no pressure on him, he is like almost triple the performance of an MVP level quarterback. But like when he's pressured, he drops down to 0.58 EPA per drop back, which is just like a massive gap in performance in terms of pressure when not. And like the thing that's like, I guess, frustrated me a little bit about watching Hurts when he gets pressure this year is like he kind of has the same answer to like all forms of pressure, which is like it's rolled to the right, and then it's either he throws the ball away, so like he's not like using his eyes downfield that often, or he like takes a 1 or 2 yard loss by like running out of bounds or kind of sliding down. And it's just like I remember Jalen Hurts being more dynamic in 2022 when he was pressured, and like the numbers show that. And it's just like been like a little bit disappointing to see like kind of him regress in terms of just like how he does when pressured. So I'm very curious to see like kind of if they, with this extra week here, like if they kind of have a plan for what they want to do when Hurts gets pressured in this game. And in terms of just like being a little bit more aggressive than what he usually has been.
I mean, all season, it has felt like really after kind of some of those early weeks, it feels like they've said, hey, Jalen, if it's a 50-50 type situation, you don't have to cut it loose. Like the way that we're going to lose these games is by turning the ball over. We don't want to put
Mhm.
ourselves in those situations. We're going to be more talented than the other team at almost every single spot, just up and down the roster, or at least certainly most spots up and down the roster. In the Super Bowl, maybe it looks a little bit different. I'm interested, Tage, aside from that, just looking at how I think Chris Jones does against Mekhi Becton. Chris Jones is always so fun to watch because it feels like he's just picking which offensive lineman he wants to attack, and he certainly gets that freedom from Spag. So Mekhi Becton, I think, has had a really good year, and I've been really, really happy just watching him improve on a week-to-week basis. Jurgens and Dickerson, they are a little bit banged up. My assumption is they're going to play this week or during the Super Bowl. I'd be surprised if they didn't, but I think you'll have some situations where Jones is lined up over right guard where I think Jones is or could beat him. I mean, Jones can beat literally any single player on any offensive line across the league. So I don't think it's saying anything against Mekhi Becton, but is that, beating in the run game as well? Is it winning over that situation in those got to have it pass situations where now, like you mentioned, you're getting Hurts just sort of bailing to the right. You get him just kind of holding, and sort of floating that ball
Mhm.
out. So that's going to be something to look at as well. Chase, thinking about just like like a fun matchup for the offense. Of course, how does the defense deal with AJ Brown is such an important question. I thought that McDuffie had some really nice snaps against Nico Collins. And of course, Nico Collins and AJ Brown are different receivers. The Chiefs did have situations where they doubled him. So I don't know. I don't know how much just pure man coverage we're going to see. It's not that they're going to like break out all these different zones. Is it clouding his side kind of often? Because AJ Brown was able to be productive in that last Super Bowl.
Yeah, for sure. And like I mentioned earlier, like when you do play man coverage, very high chance it's going to be thrown to AJ Brown. And when you blitz, the Eagles, they've also thrown it to AJ Brown a lot this year as well. He's like their go-to answer to kind of seeing things that they want to on in terms of coverage. And teams have to be careful about when they play cover one against the Chiefs this year. Like based on the FTN charting, like the Eagles' success rate and EPA against cover one is much higher than against cover two and cover three. And I do think a big portion of that is like you're playing man coverage against AJ Brown with a single high safety. Like he can just run deep and come down with almost any ball. And we've seen that the Eagles' pass offense has had a decent amount of success with go balls this year. Like they've thrown 47 of them. They've generated 0.42 EPA on those. And they've also had success with hitch and curl routes this year. They've thrown 102 of them. You usually have a successful play on 2/3 of them with a similar EPA as their go balls, but like they struggle when they have to throw quick outs. So like if you get AJ Brown running at you in a straight line and he's either stopping or going straight, like that's where you can become into trouble. But if you can kind of get the Eagles to have to throw like areas of the field that they feel less comfortable throwing to, like outside without breaking routes, like you can feel a little bit better about that as a defense.
And some of those routes where it's those outbreakers, it feels like I'm thinking back to the Panthers game. There was one situation where I thought Hurts maybe could cut it loose, and he didn't. It does feel like this offense has the ability. Like if they just win this game and Hurts plays really well, they can just look at the whole narrative from this year and just kind of be like, all right, well, who cares? Like it doesn't even matter that this passing offense has had some struggles. And Tage, in preparation for this, certainly there's so many games that you can sort of look back on where Fangio had some or played against or coordinated against the Chiefs twice for the Dolphins last season. Once in the snow, once earlier on, and I think it was an international game where I thought he had a really good plan for Travis Kelsey. There are situations where
Mhm.
Fangio's playing against Mahomes back when Fangio was in Denver. I mean, you got Tyreek Hill on the field. I can't believe we let Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill play football together. What a time that was. And then I think back to certainly the Eagles playing the Chiefs, of course, in the Super Bowl, but also last season where I thought AJ Brown got, a lot of the snaps he was flustered on. And a lot of that was L'Jarius Sneed, and they
Mhm.
don't have L'Jarius Sneed notably in this game. So part of me feels like, hey, maybe it's an interesting one for AJ Brown.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, you gotta tell your nephews like you gotta be like, hey, you want to hear something crazy? Like Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill used to be on the same team together. Like I feel like that's gonna blow their mind when they find out about that.
I love it. Yeah. And now, so they have, I'm pretty sure they have like a bunch of jerseys. And so they have like a Tyreek Hill. I think they have a Tyreek Hill Dolphins one. I think they have a Mahomes one. It's like, hey, man, like you don't even know. I mean, they're now asking questions. They're like, did Patrick Mahomes ever play Tom Brady? I think I talked about on the last, but these kids are curious. They haven't submitted their official predictions.
Mm.
The Chiefs Bills game was really fun because one of the nephews was wearing a Mahomes jersey, one was wearing an Allen jersey, and then like after, I think that the Chiefs scored first, and then the nephew wearing the Allen jersey was like, "I'm not rooting for the Bills anymore. Like I'm taking this jersey off." I'm like, "But whole lot of ball game left. Like there's so much." I will say though, I think overall, I mean, I'm not sure what the best way to approach it is. I don't want to just like push off fandom on them and say, "Yeah, you got to root for this team." Obviously, they're going to be in an area like where whatever their friends are rooting for, maybe that gets pushed, but Tej, I like the idea of being in the just like we're gonna root for players here. Will I get them a Vic Fangio jersey? I don't know, Tej. Maybe in the future.
I mean, it would be. Would you get like 00 on the back? Like, what would be the number associated with the Fangio jersey?
That's what? That's a fascinating question, Tej. I will say, you do a little Google search. There's some Vic Fangio back in high school. Maybe you pull out his high school jersey.
That would be awesome.
Maybe I roll up to the Superdome for media availability on that first day of Super Bowl in like a retro Vic Fangio middle school jersey. I feel like I don't know. Will that draw a laugh from him? I'm not 100% sure.
I mean, yeah, he might ask you to leave. There's either two things that can happen there. Like he asks you to leave media availability, or he like brings you up on the podium with him, and you just get to do a solo interview. Like, there's no in between if you show up wearing his middle school jersey to media day.
There's absolutely no in between there. It does feel like for the Chiefs Eagles game, there is a lot of in between where I mean, could I imagine a world where there was like a blowout in one direction or the other? I suppose, but one, the Chiefs just play every game down to the wire and
Mhm.
they're gonna win by 3 in most of these games. Feels like the Eagles defense overall is not going to have a game where they let up like 40 points. I do think the Chiefs are going to be able to score. It's hard to pretend like they're not going to be able to move the ball in certain situations. But Tasia, really hold on to that last Bills game. Obviously, it's the last game that the Chiefs played. It was a home game for the Chiefs. The Bills defense did enough to stop them. Like they didn't have like the best game, but like when they really needed to, they were able to get stops coming out of halftime. They were able to force a field goal later on. I certainly think that the Eagles defense is better than the Bills defense. And then on the opposite side, when the Bills turn to 6 offensive linemen, we're just going to hand the ball off to James Cook this entire drive and run over you. When you have those snaps where Chris Jones is out a little bit, I think that's a situation where the Eagles should feel positive. The Eagles can sort of run on them just a little bit. And if the Bills were able to do it, I feel like the Eagles, maybe they can do it a little bit in this game too. Of course, we're still talking about Eagles offense versus Chiefs defense. There's so much here. Like there's so much here. Where Tej, do you think I'm overweighting that, like how the Chiefs played in that Bills game a little bit?
No, I mean, I don't think so. Like, I mean, it's a very like it's a very hard question for a lot of us who like to look at like season long data to project performances. Like the Chiefs are a very unique case where like we have this belief that they not only save like plays for the playoffs, in terms of like Andy Reid running the Samaje P. Ryan play at the end of the game, like to close it out. Like that's a play like the Chiefs probably wouldn't have used in the regular season because they wanted to save it for a moment like that one. And so it's like you do kind of have to use that. And what we've seen from the Chiefs, like turning up their offense in the playoffs for multiple consecutive years now, for protecting them out. But like you also have to think about the Bills defense was just in a rough state coming into that game, and then even more so in that game with some of the injuries that they had. Like the Eagles defense is going to be a lot better than that, just from like a talent on the field perspective and probably even a scheme perspective. So, have to bake that in as well. But I still think like the Chiefs showed enough in the Bills game to be like, all right, like they are back to a usual Chiefs offense that we've become accustomed to in the Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce era.
Tej, let's do our official predictions before we get to our nonsense segments here. So I've thought a lot about it. We've gone through so much data. We've talked a lot of film. You could definitely say, "Oh, this game's just going to come down to a turnover or like the bounce of a ball." It certainly could be that situation. My official prediction submission, Tej, it's going to be Eagles 27, Chiefs 24. Think back to the Bills game a lot. I really do. It's obviously the most recent one. We talked about it a bunch here. I think the Eagles defense is going to at least, make things hard for the Chiefs offense overall. I don't think they're going to stop them up and down the field. I think there's going to be situations where you find Travis Kelce just really able to take advantage of Oren Burks in pass coverage at different times. I think you're going to find
Mhm.
situations where Xavier Worthy is running away from people. But if the Bills were able to make some of those kind of key stops or frustrate things just a little bit, I have to think that the Eagles defense can do it. Even though, like, yeah, you're on turf, like you're in kind of better circumstances in that way. overall. And then I think to the Eagles offense and feel like they should be able to run the ball. They really should. Even if the Chiefs are getting heavy inside, Chiefs are going to do different things in terms of you're going to move Leo Chanel onto the line. That's really going to mess with your sort of run scheme overall. I think the Eagles have been positive in those situations overall. I think that Jalen Hurts is coming off a positive game, and it could be a situation where all he needs to do is make like a handful of positive plays in this game to be able to push it in that direction. So that's my official prediction. I mean, we're recording this on Saturday. Is there going to be news that comes out during the middle of the week? Who knows? I'm not allowed to get off this official prediction page. It feels like I've said it here. I can't go on all these radio shows during a Radio Row and just be like, oh, no, I think the Chiefs are going to win. It feels like I have to be pretty solid on this one, Tej.
You could do the thing where you go on half the radio shows, you give out the Chiefs, half the radio shows give out the Eagles, and then
Academically
you can just
dishonest,
you
Tej.
could just
Absolutely
post.
not. It's
No,
bad content. It's not. It's unfair. It's unfair. I've asked you to have a prediction here. I put mine out there. There's no switches. I feel like if you get some like crazy news where it's like, oh well, like every player on the Eagles had food poisoning, they had too many Uncrustables that day, and these guys are not playing in the game. I will say I reserve the right to make a change for that. But outside of that, I mean, I got nothing. Tage, what are you going? I will say, you have the right to change it. But if I'm going, I can't. I can't. I'm
no.
on wax here. Can't go
Yeah,
on radio shows.
I'll lock it in here. Even if a fire alarm gets pulled at one of the team hotels or anything, I'll stay with the same prediction. So I'm glad that you went with the Eagles there, because I'm gonna go with the Chiefs, 27-20. Final score for the Super Bowl. Like when I just like think about this game, and I like really love this Eagles roster, but like I do think that the Chiefs offense is playing at a very high level right now. They have three different pass catchers who can all affect you in the game. I think they can do just enough on the ground with Kareem Hunt to like if they want to run the ball, which like I don't really know why they would want to that often. And then on defense, it's like this Chiefs secondary with Jalen Watson back, with how well Trent McDuffie can play in the playoffs, with just like the three linebackers that they can all use, and what Chris Jones and George Karlaftis can do on the front. Like I just think they have enough guys on defense to affect this Eagles offense. And I know that they're going to be very confident coming into this game because they're going to feel good about their pass defense. And then it's just all about like, can you make sure that when Saquon gets his 3 or 4 explosives in this game, they go for 15 yards instead of 50 yards? Like, I think that's really what it's going to come down to. And I trust the Chiefs defense to do that. And then if we're in a scenario where it's 2020, 3 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and Mahomes has the ball, like they will, like they have such a high chance of getting into the range of which they need the necessary points that I just trust Mahomes a lot more in that situation than Jalen Hurts in this past game. Even though Hurts is definitely very capable of doing it, like Mahomes is the best quarterback, at least I've seen, at those end of game situations. And so that's really kind of what pushes it over to the Chiefs side for me.
The most likely outcome here is we are late in the game and Patrick Mahomes has the ball in his hands. Like it's just that's how the Super Bowl goes, right? And that's how
Yes,
obviously when you
yes.
have Mahomes there, and that is frightening. I think if you're looking at that from an Eagles perspective, there's obviously a very clear path to the Chiefs winning in this game. Like them continuing to be an efficient offense, them just really hammering those third down situations, them getting the Eagles into some of those third and long situations where they're forcing it to be a pass to win type game for the Eagles, and you're able to just kind of get them in pass from multiple times. And in this one, certainly, the game management stuff overall is going to be a really big one where, it feels overall for Nick Sirianni, it's not just that he's, and maybe for a lot of coaches that are pushing aggressive or not aggressive, it's not like he's just like, these are the go for it numbers, I'm gonna follow it. It is a little bit of that, your belly feel just a touch there.
Yeah.
And I think he's gonna think back to that last Super Bowl where I think he does regret not going for that fourth down. I think it was kind of towards the middle end of the game, if I remember correctly. I assume that you're going to get a situation in this game that is like that. I think he's going to go, and that result could totally determine it. I guess I'm hopeful that it's not like turnovers or special teams plays deciding it. And I mean, and they're super important. The Eagles have done a very good job improving how they're punching out the ball. Special teams unit absolutely do matter. I don't want to pretend like those things are not important, but I just want it to be like an offense defense battle, and you're going to figure out something, and Fangio's pulling out some nonsense, Spags is pulling out some nonsense, and you're just getting quarterbacks playing at a high level. It's just going to be a really, really fun one. And Tej, I'm glad we we have opposite sides. I would argue, do we have any real rooting interest? Probably not, but it's going to be fun. Who's right, who's wrong? We got a binary situation here, Tish. It will be a good one.